Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Woodward's Watercolours. Today what we're going to be looking at is these. Now these are Daler Rowney's Simply Range Opaque Watercolour Gouache or Gouache or Gouache, I don't know how you pronounce it. Anyway, I've never ever tried these before. I've managed to do A-levels in art, foundation degree, practiced, and I'm 44 and this is the first time that I have ever used gouache. So come with me as we try these out and see how this goes. I have watched some others using it, but I just want to give my first impression of what it's like, how it works. It's going to be a roller coaster ride of discovery. I bought this was actually on offer. It was about £4 I think for this pack, and I thought, well, we'll give it a go. So come with me and let's try out gouache together. Okay, so here we are. We've got the Daler Rowney Simply Opaque Watercolour Gouache, and I haven't opened them as yet, as you can see. So just a very simple set, probably the most basic that you can find. So what I'm going to do is just squeeze them out as we go. Now what I discovered is that, I don't know whether you knew this, but the little mark there at the top, or raised bit there at the top, is just so that you can pierce it. So one thing that I have discovered in researching the gouache is that it is it'll dry out obviously if you leave it. I can't always have to remember to press these. It'll dry out if you leave it, but then you can reactivate it with water, which is pretty good to hear. It isn't like watercolor, which I know that some people would say you can really reactivate it, but it's never really been my experience. Maybe because I'm using it normally in quite a thin wash. So in my head, I'm preparing to use this in a more acrylic-like fashion. So we have got vermilion here. This one was a lemon yellow, and that first one was just a plain white. They're not specifying whether that is titanium or like a zinc mixing white, and that one just there exploded a little bit. Must have been the pressure in the little pot. So mustn't set that one down over there, it'll make a real mess. So we're now, that one was the crimson red. Now we're moving on to cerulean, one of my all-time favorite colors. I'm amazed that I've got to 44 years old as an artist, never having used gouache, and I am really liking the gouache pronunciation rather than gouache as I used to call it. So just putting these together. That's ultramarine, only a couple more to go. This is sap green, really handy when you figure out that actually that little spike at the top of the lid is for opening that. Okay, and then we've got viridian. And put the viridian, it'll be the last colour to go on that line. And then we've got yellow ochre coming up next. Interesting that they didn't put the yellow ochre beside the lemon yellow. Just move it over here. Oh, forgot to do the spiking bit. And that one was effervescent, ready to pop out there as well. Okay, then we've got burnt sienna. Burnt sienna's a great colour, really a Belfast building brick colour, so it's always one that I like to see. And then we've got burnt umber, another great one. That's the one that we can use with the black to earth it down if it's turned into Payne's grey, and if we want to make a Payne's grey out of a black, then we add in the ultramarine, and then that lifts it to that lovely, cool, beautiful Payne's grey, and there we've got the black. Okay, so that's everything set out there. Now the brushes that I am using are from Sostrene Grene, and I find them, well, this one actually is a Daler Rowney System 3. I inherited this one, it's a flash wash, 1/2 inch. We've got Sostrene Grene number 4, number 11 and a number 9. They're all flat edge brushes. So one of the things that what I want to try first actually is, let me take a thicker brush. So I just want to experiment with a couple of these colors. So what I know is that with gouache, you can use them straight. So we'll take the burnt sienna. So we can use them straight, and then if we add water to them, then they're going to really go into more of like a watercolor wash. Pretty much the same as you would find with an acrylic. But I also know that, like an acrylic, if you then, let's take the red, gotta get this one right. That's the crimson red. If you take the crimson red, let's go this way this time. So you can get that lovely thick color, and again then just adding in for a wash. So you've got the flexibility of the two effective thicknesses. So I would assume with gouache then that you can have it sitting up off the page, whereas you're not going to do that with a watercolor. And the other thing then is you can effectively then, one of the main differences is, sorry, that you're not using the white of the page with gouache, you're using the white actually to go over it. So obviously that would need to dry to be able to make that addition to it. What I want to experiment with as well is, just while we're here, I'm going to take this cerulean, I'm going to mix it into a wash. Now you can see already it feels against this acrylic block that it has more sort of grit and substance to it. So it's an opaque wash, so it's as described on the tin, just a check for me. Oh, and you can still flick a little bit as well. So really interesting. The other thing that I want to do as well is just see how it reacts. If I take the neat black's always really, really good to try this with. Just do a very simple straight line. And then I'm going to take the water, put on loads and loads of the water, see what it does. So you can see it start to lift quite a bit there, which is nice. And if I agitate that even more, then I would assume that that's, yeah, there we go. So I mean, if you worked with watercolor straight like that, it's going to do that. So from what I can understand then, the two main differences with it are it's opaque. So it's not like a clear wash, it's an opaque color or paint to use. The other thing about it then is that you can then use the white on top of it. So you're going to be able to add the lighter colors to it. You're not having to think in layers in terms of layering up. So it's going to be interesting. I'm going to pick a scene to work on with this exact spread that I've got with this palette, and we'll do that together. Okay, so the particular scene that we're going to do today is an aerial shot of, I think it's really coming into Bristol Airport when I was over with Toby. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to treat this like how I would treat when I'm using acrylic. So when I'm using acrylic, what I'm doing is initially starting with really quite a wash. Now I've never used these before, so I'm just going to mix them together and see. Now that's a little bit too vibrant for me, so what we're going to do is earth it down. That's earthed it down probably too much, but we're just going to treat it much more like an acrylic. And whenever I'm doing acrylics, I tend to start with more of a wash really per se. So it's just getting the main colors in, mixing here across to try and find some of these richer colors then that are occurring with these trees down across here. So really what I'm doing is mapping out these parts, just looking at different, seeing where the blocks of the color are. So the reference image is going to be in the top corner there for you. So it's just really trying to find that, just finding the basic shapes, and then also then up into that top corner, which is going to be much more of a blue tone as it's getting more hazy as we go up here. So just taking those block colors in and looking to see, okay, what else is going on here. I'm going to take some of the yellow ochre. So at this point, I'm really using it like watercolor. This is effectively a watercolor wash at this point. The main difference then that I'm discovering in my first use with gouache is that it's opaque. That is the fundamental difference. So remember, I'm a watercolorist, so I'm thinking in layers. A little bit of that lemon yellow there to see what it does. A lot of it's going to be as well showing, right, well, what are these colors doing when they're mixed together? How are they acting together? What's this like? And that's why I wanted to do this video, was to show, okay, so I've never used these before. So how am I going to take the skills that I have and transfer them across? So again, just trying to find these different colors here. I'm quite liking this one. And then that's getting a lot lighter now. It's going to be interesting adding white into this. See what that does. And then how that looks when you're setting that across. Now this is, the room's warm, the little studio's warm today. It's a warm day in Northern Ireland. It has finally happened. I'm going to change the brush to something a bit thinner. I'm going to go for the System 3 brush. And also, in terms of even cleaning brushes, is a totally different thing with gouache rather than the normal watercolor. So I want to build a little bit on this area here. So let's take some of this green. So again, I want to reiterate, I am figuring out as I go here how to mix and find these colors and use them effectively. That's maybe darker than I want, but we're gonna, okay, so the other thing that I'm discovering with these is you really are able to use them much more like acrylic. So just gonna continue to take this. This is part of the building up process. I'm grateful for experience with acrylic at this point, because at least with the acrylic I know what it's like working with a medium, and also with oil to a certain extent, but really quite different too, you know. Just, and also how's that going to react if I add that onto, oh, it's going to hold its own. It's interesting. So it's not going to just fall to pieces initially just because I have added in a thicker version. That's really interesting to me. It's going to bleed a little bit. We're okay with that. And also I wonder what the layering up process is going to be like as well. Again, another thing that I find is that different media bring out different elements of your style, and it's about going with it. I was listening to a little reel today on Instagram and was talking about play, and being creative is about play. And I would tend to agree. They were saying that if you can hold away this fear of getting things wrong, then you just go into this and you see where it goes. I'm going to take some of that lemon yellow. I'm trying to remember the names that Daler Rowney have given. So these are not, as I said, that was £4 for these, and they're not expensive. It's nice actually against that acrylic. I thought that was going to be one of the best ways to show what they're like. So just adding these on in different sections. If you've watched me paint before, there's going to be real elements of what I normally do coming through as I'm doing this, which is what you want. You want to be yourself. You don't want to completely alter what you're doing because you're using a different media. You want to make that media, in a sense, yield to how you would use it. And this is where the whole issue of right practice, and I'm sure it could open up a can of worms with this, but I believe that right practice is how you would use them. And in doing that, then you're going to give liberty to others. Now let's get no, it's not even going to, totally different. Get a bit of a flick, but actually the flick seems almost out of place with this, a little bit anyway. then you've got that really, now this is going to be interesting. Let's try this. Let's get the white going. Taking some of that burnt umber. This is going to be a test here. Interesting. So it's giving translucent vibes, but it is giving coverage and is sitting on top of. So as these dry then, this should be really interesting. Hopefully it's going to dry pretty quickly as well, because the room's really quite warm. So I'm mixing a really quite a vibrant green here. You never know, this could be my new favourite media. I don't think anything will ever replace watercolour now, but isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? And I am just continually looking at this reference image and thinking, okay, what am I seeing? What am I wanting to do here? And a bit of, this is where colour mixing is a really good thing that will stand by you in obviously whatever media you're using, because it's a transferable skill. I love experimenting with new media. I find it really, really interesting, and it really helps you see how you do things. So we're just going to keep persevering with this layering up process. Now, I want to see if I was to take, I'll take a good chunk of this white here. It's an interesting consistency as well. You know, it's effectively, you know, quite pouring nearly out of the tube, whereas acrylic and oil hold their own. This has got a certain consistency to it. So I would assume then, as this would dry, you can just continue to layer up. Now it seems also quite stubborn to get off the brush, so it's taken a bit of work to get it off the brush, clean the brush. So I imagine then also the water's going to get that bit more murky that bit quicker. So I'm taking this and some of these lines here. Now I probably could reduce down to an even thinner brush for this. Just trying to give that sort of sense of, okay, so we're dealing with patchwork quilts here. Going off into the distance. The thing I want to do then is start to build up and add a bit of brown into that. Part of me is nearly itching to get the watercolour pencils into this, because you know it's going to be able to bring more form, and maybe that's something to do, but just for this I really want to keep it just solely gouache. Sorry, gouache. Let me get it right. Gouache. Now I'm going to need to thin the line a little bit more for some of this. Thin that line again, flatten out the brush. Loading up the brush again and pushing it towards to get a good lot of the paint actually onto the brush this time, to get those sort of darker areas. Using the corner of the brush again. Really fascinating using a media that you've never used before, because you've no idea how it's going to react. I mean, I'm so used to watercolor and what it does and how it plays together. This is just something altogether else. Right, I'm going to give this just a little second, which literally will be a second for you for this to dry, and then we're going to add on another layer. Okay, now we've got this dry. Now this is where we can really see how we can go and lighten up some of these areas here. And that's interesting that really it's drying on the palette here as well. Dries really quickly, dries really chalky. And also you seem to need quite a lot of it to be able to create that, you know, the tone that you're wanting to make to cover over something. So let's try and lift a good bit of this here and see what this does on the layer on top. Now clearly I'm going to need more white. Just going to squeeze out a little bit more white here. So this could be the life or the death of the gouache for me. It's something that I've always wanted to try, and I always think it's really interesting. First impressions. I was trying out new watercolors last night, and it was really interesting. Okay, so that's a good bit lighter. Now, obviously, it needs to be really huge quantities of white to really, it's not looking as light on the layer as it could do when it's added. Now that's more like it. Okay, so that's interesting to me. Okay, so let's add a little bit more of the yellow to this. Let's see how that, now that looks too vibrant to me on the mixing palette, but it's not too light there. So actually even the wash of it is quite transparent. So you're needing vast quantities of white to be able to make this do what actually I would have thought before I had used this it would have done more readily. It's very interesting. And also, I know I've said this before, but I'm coming to this media as a watercolorist, so therefore my viewpoint is that I'll try and firm up these lines a little bit that bled whenever we were doing the distance, but that's actually working quite well. Just pulling out some of those little bits over here. Again, let's take more, even more, let's be even bolder this time. So the ratio of white to the other pigment, there's, you know, it's nearly like 80% white, this one. So let's see if it's going to work for us and give us some of those little highlights. Now, if I take a good bit of that, take even more of that lemon yellow to add into that, and I'm going to add in the sap green, which is going to dull it down. Hopefully it'll keep its vibrancy. Maybe that's another thing about gouache, but it's better with vibrant colors. Now there's part of this, yeah, I mean it's all right. It's not as explosive as I thought it would be. I thought it would really like almost be fluorescent and pop off the page, but you know, it's all right. Can you hear the slight disappointment in my voice? Take a little bit of burnt sienna, that's going to dull it way down now, but let's see what it does. There's a couple of the fields here that are a really different hue, so we'll push it up and get loads on the brush and see what that does. We'll go for this one down here. So interesting. Colours are very interesting. They are not at all what I would have expected. Like, not at all. Just looking to see, can I see this anywhere else? Let's lighten this one way up too. So basically, if you're using gouache, you need loads of white, particularly if you're adding on top of. It's a good bit lighter there, but again, not as light as you would expect it to be. Very interesting. So actually, in some ways, you would really need to work in layers and think you're not going to... It's not like you can just add white. You can add white, but it's not as if it's just going to cover it really, really easily as you could do with an oil. An oil is going to afford you that luxury. Just going to bring in some of these. Oh, don't know what happened. That was obviously still wet. And pulled out a little bit of that. The much darker tone there, more than I thought it would have. Okay, and then so really cleaning the brush, and I'm going to pour out more white then as well. That water's, it's as well we're working in that tonal range because that water is going to be really predominant. Now you can see that that's dry there, so just a little bit of water is just releasing that again, which is really nice. Right, that's interestingly, the darker tones are much darker than I thought, so the lighter aren't able to cover as much as I thought they would, and the darker ones are covering far more than I actually thought was possible. Okay, so I'm just not gonna try and capture really the sense of those buildings there, because I'm very aware of time here as well. So let's mix up that little bit darker. I'm gonna add the white into this, and I want to add in some of the yellow ochre, and then we're going to add in more of the green. Dull it down again with the burnt umber. Now it should be light. Yeah, it's not too bad. Again, not as light as you would think it would be. So this has been a really good and worthwhile experiment, certainly for me personally, because I always wanted to try gouache. Never bought any. Had opportunity to buy some. And here we are. Let's see here. I'm waiting for this kind of sense where these colors are standing on their own 2 feet. You know, with watercolor, I'm not expecting them to do that. But with gouache, I was very much expecting that it would really let me, you know, model it more when adding white into it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take some pure white here, and I'm going to see what it does. So even at that, there's just a little building there. Pick up on a few houses and another little building there. So the white is okay, but again, it's not what I expected. Hopefully you can see above my head there. Okay, right. So I'm going to call it a day there. I could probably fiddle for much longer, but I'm very aware that you're watching a video that you probably don't want to watch for an extended amount of time. I don't know what I think. I think that it's more translucent than I thought it was. I don't think that the addition of the white on top is anywhere near as effective as you might find in acrylic or oil. The wash element, yeah, I quite like it. I would be tempted to use gouache more as opaque watercolor rather than using it with these varying thicknesses. But actually, it's a nice sketch of that aerial view. I'm pleased with the brush marks that you can see here. This area is a little bit muddy, but actually I think probably as you step back, you can appreciate it a little bit more. It is kind of semi-abstract. So there you go. Right, let's have a think. So there you go. Should we just take a moment together? Notice the words I'm using, I was very excited about trying out gouache. I was very hopeful that it would act somewhere in between, and actually, do you know, as I'm thinking this through and processing, it really is somewhere in between acrylic and watercolor. I think the midpoint seems to be gouache. It is definitely opaque, absolutely, totally agree with that. The adding on of, you know, the colors and them not being translucent, that certainly doesn't seem to be my experience with it. The darker tones seem to be darker on the page, and the lighter tones mixed with white, even though they seem so light on that acrylic mixing block, seem to be not as light on the page. Didn't really like the coverage of the white on top of the darker colours, even though that was put on straight. I thought it was okay. I think I would use it for sketching, definitely. I would definitely want to try and use it more as an opaque watercolour. But just a really interesting process, eh? Just interesting to try these things out. Am I a gouache fan? I don't think that it's going to be something I'll be racing to do again. But for those of you who absolutely love it, please don't let me discourage you in any shape or form. Everybody has their media that they thoroughly enjoy. But this was, let me grab the box, Daler Rowney Simply Range opaque watercolour gouache. It does what it says on the tin. It was £4, so I'm not going to lose any sleep over it. I've got a painting that I'm not unhappy with. I've had a very interesting process. I hope that you found benefit in watching me in this process. Maybe for you, I've highlighted reasons why you absolutely love gouache, and I am delighted if that's the case. But I am really interested to read your comments on this. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Do like and subscribe and share, and I will see you sometime soon. Bye bye for now.